Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Monsul, the host, the creator, and the producer of this program called Communicating Today. We've been on Channel 10 for about 20 years, and we're well past 500 shows. We should achieve our 600th show probably sometime in 2011, and we're right here now in 2010. We have a wonderful show for you tonight, and we come on, by the way, 3 times every week. For those of you who watch us on a regular basis, we come on every Sunday afternoon at 3:30, every Wednesday evening in prime time at 8:30 p.m., and every Friday morning for you early birds while you're driving to work at 6:30 a.m. when you probably can't watch our show because you're in your car. And we have a very special guest on our program tonight, but before I introduce my guest to you, I want to mention a gentleman that is a wonderful doctor, a dentist, who I went to see last week, as a matter of fact, and I told him I had a little chip on my front tooth, and I said, Doc, his name is Doug Alderman, Dr. Doug Alderman, a dentist. I go to him, been going to him for a long time. I said, you got to fix that chip on my front tooth, Doug. I said, because I got to be on TV, and that's not going to look very good. So he said, John, give me about 15 or 20 minutes, and I'll have you looking like new. And ladies and gentlemen, he fixed me up real nice, and there it is, no chip. So I got to thank my good friend, my dentist, Dr. Doug Alderman of the Ashburn Clinic in Ashburn, Virginia. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our show. Our show is all about something called honesty. Honesty sells. At the cover of this book that you have right here in front of you, and we're going to talk about honesty and honesty in selling, professional selling, which is a field that I come from, and my guest, whose name, by the way, is Mr. Stephen Gaffney, he's sitting right alongside of me here, espouses honesty, truthfulness with your deal with your customers, with your deal with your clients, and what have you. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. He started his company, Stephen Gaffney Company, about 15 years ago. He is a leading expert in honesty and truthfulness in communications, influence, and leadership. He says that honest communications and his results system speak to anybody about anything, anytime, which is what his program espouses. He's worked with a lot of major clients, Fortune 500 companies, the federal government, the military companies like Marriott, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Citigroup, Allstate, NASA, the space agency, American Cancer Society, and the United States Navy, among many, many others. He's appeared on many of the television programs around the country, CBS, NBC, Fox, etc., and appeared in many leading magazines, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and what have you. He's also been on our program, Communicating Today, probably 3 or 4 times before. I can't even keep number of the count. He's been on so many times. So it's with a great deal of pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to welcome Stephen Gaffney again for the 3rd or 4th or 5th time. Stephen, thank you so much for being in our program. So nice to have you again.
Thanks for having me, John.
Program. Wonderful to have you again. I guess what we ought to do, Stephen, is kind of break the program in half. First half of the program, talk a little bit about you and your background and where you came from and your education and so forth, and how you got started in this business. And then take a little break in the middle of the show, reintroduce the program to our guests who may have tuned in a little bit late, and then take the second half of the program and talk about this wonderful book that you wrote called Honesty Sells. And this happens to be your 3rd book, too, by the way. We'll talk about the other 2 books as well. So I guess to start out, Stephen, why don't we tell us a little bit about your family background, where you grew up and where you got started and so forth. I know you weren't born in the United States. I think you were born overseas. Isn't that right?
Well, I was born in Stockholm, Sweden.
Stockholm, Sweden. Right.
My parents were there on business, but I basically grew up in Bethesda, Maryland.
Oh, okay.
And
so you're one of that 99% of the, I guess they say 90% of the people are transplants. They came from somewhere else. You're one of the natives, kind of, if you grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. And where did you go to school?
I went to Walter Johnson High School and then James Madison University.
Okay, wonderful. Did you major in anything in particular? Or?
Poli-sci, and I minored in communication and public administration.
Which kind of led you into
Well, actually,
business
interesting enough, none of what I teach I learned in college. No offense to James Madison, but it just so happens that the way my career path took me eventually led me to do and teach communication.
Right.
And I came from the business side. I was an agent for film and radio commercial directors. And the very first seminar I ever did was for photographers. And then in my field, if you can stand up and help people and teach them stuff that works, you'll get rehired. So the very first seminar I did was for photographers, kind of led to other seminars. And then a graphic designer who heard me speak, her husband worked for IBM. She recommended me to her husband. And that's how I kind of crossed over into the business world. And then as results got produced, the business grew from there.
Yeah, I know you mentioned in the book, you mentioned it quite frequently, and I know that you and I have talked before. about in the field of marketing, in the field of business, in the field of sales in particular, which is basically what this book is all about, Honesty Sells, which is about professional selling, is that word called networking. That word networking is so important about meeting people and shaking hands and handing out business cards and going to luncheons and going to meetings and what have you. And in fact, I think even when you came in our studio tonight on Channel 10, the show that was here before us in the studio, as the people were leaving the studio from the previous show, I saw you going around and shaking everybody's hands and exchanging business cards, all about networking, which is what you just said.
You know, and a lot of people talk about networking, but there's a concept that I also often teach, that build your network, avoid inbred thinking. Here's an example of what I mean by that. You ever have a problem in life and you call a friend, and if your friend sides with the other person, what do you tend to do? And usually what most people tend to do is, if the friend sides with the other person, we hang up and call another friend. What's interesting is we actively seek people who are in agreement. So one of the concepts I teach is to build your network, avoid inbred thinking, not just from a sales and marketing and growth, but actually to get fresh ideas. Most people go to the same old people and get the same old ideas and produce the same old results. If you want different results in your life, you got to look at who you're hanging around with and then maybe mix that up a little bit, and then you'll produce different results.
Yeah. Now, I know, I guess, now when you graduated from school and so forth, as we just heard before, you had an early working career where you had a couple of jobs, and I read in your book that the first couple of jobs you had, you weren't that happy with, and you weren't even that successful because you really didn't like what you were doing. You didn't like you were in sales. You didn't like the products you were selling. You weren't that convinced that these were the best products for your clients' purposes and needs. And so you weren't that happy, and you said, this is not the kind of work that I want to do. What I want to do is I want to motivate people. I want to teach people how to communicate more effectively. I want to help them to increase their interpersonal communication skills. And you started a company, and you called it Stephen Gaffney Company approximately, 15 years ago or so. And you got into the consulting and seminar business, and that's kind of what you've been doing for the last 15 years or so. Tell us how that all came about and why you went from the unsuccessful early jobs that you had in your career onto a very successful career in your own business in the consulting and the seminar business.
Well, basically from the age of 21, from getting out of college, to the age of 31, let me sum up how I was.
Okay.
Unsuccessful. And one of the things that I realized is that if I didn't like something, I wasn't very good at selling it. And so what I did is, if I didn't like the job, I just quit. So I had a series of jobs, but it was not really a problem on the job. It was more me with the job. And some people can sell something no matter how, let's say, not passionate they are. But I'm the kind of person that needs to be passionate about it. So I just kept quitting jobs until eventually I stumbled on being an agent for film and radio commercial directors, which I covered earlier, which eventually led me into doing the seminar business. So one of the concepts I teach people, and I think it's very important, is to really love what you do. And here's why that is so important. Everybody talks about that. Love what you do, because that's the key to success. But see, here's why this is so important. If you love what you do and you're lousy at it, what are you going to do? And the answer is, most likely you're going to study, you're going to read up, you're going to figure out how to make it successful. But if you're semi-good at what you do and you don't really love what you do, you're not going to keep working on your craft. So really, when you look at the most successful people, they really love what they do. And the reason why this all works together is because they generally stumble their way through success because they keep working at it. So one of the things that I learned out of that experience, I often share to people, is love what you do. And if you don't love what you're doing, something I learned from my grandfather, you can at least love why you're doing it. You know, you ever meet those people that maybe have a job that they're not really that excited about, but they get up and they do the job day in and day out because they may not love the actual activity, but they love why they're doing it. So they might be doing it for their family, to support themselves, to support others. But either way, you either got to love what you do or you got to love why you're doing it. That's what's very important.
And as you just explained, Stephen, you mentioned the first 8 or 10 years of your business career when you got out of school, out of college and so forth. You weren't happy. You tried different jobs because you didn't find something that you could learn to love, that you had a deep and abiding passion for. And you went on to these different functions and so forth, and all of a sudden, somewhere in your life, you said, hey, you know what I need to do? People don't know how to communicate with each other. They don't know how to speak to each other. They don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to exchange ideas with one another and so forth. So I think there's room in this world for somebody like myself who believe strongly in good, strong personal communications to come into the picture and maybe help people to acquire those skills and achieve those goals. And so maybe I can teach people how to do that, because this is what I firmly believe in, and I think it's so necessary if you're going to achieve success in this world, that you need to be a good communicator, an effective communicator. And I'm going to do seminars. I'm going to teach people how workshops and how to do this. I'm going to travel around the country to companies, to the government, to anybody who wants to hear me talk, because I think I can love doing this, because this is what I love to do. And I know that if I love it as much as I know I will, then I can make money doing this.
But here's the thing. It's not just about communicating. It's really about honestly communicating, is what I'm very passionate about.
Title of your book.
Yeah, and this is the third book, and this book actually, incidentally, just as I have a co-author, Colleen Francis, who is great. But here's the idea. The idea is that first book is Just Be Honest, second book is Honesty Works, and this is Honesty Sells. The idea behind this is what's most important in life is to just be straightforward. You ever meet that salesperson who tries to spin things, and let's say you are fooled momentarily. So you actually buy what they're offering, but you get home, you try it out, and you find out it's not at all what they touted it to be. Yeah. Then you'll never buy from that salesperson again. Right. And that goes the same for companies. So one of the things that I teach folks is you got to tell people the truth. And people are smart, and we're lousy actors and actresses. People just aren't fooled overall. You may fool them once, you may fool them twice, but in the end, when they figure things out, they will not trust you again if they've lied. So one of the most important things we got to do is continue to tell people the truth.
Right. I know that the theme of this program, Stephen, as we discussed before, and the main reason why I wanted you to be on the show again for the fourth time, the whole theme of this particular program that we're doing tonight is honesty and truthfulness, which seems to be something that's kind of a foregone principle in this world today that we're talking about. When you think about people like Tiger Woods, think about people like John Edwards, and I guess I could name a whole bunch of other people that were just the reverse and the opposite of truthfulness and honesty and straightforwardness. And so this is a very important trait that you want, and not only are we talking about honesty and truthfulness, but we're talking about it specifically in a particular profession, in the profession of selling, as the honesty and truthfulness applies to this particular occupation.
Absolutely. Well, here's the other thing, is because history shows in the end we find out the truth. Right. So look at what happened with the Tiger Woods situation and even the John Edwards situation. In the end, we do find out the truth. The 24-hour news cycle, and as much as going on, and you got all these websites and people reporting on all this stuff going on, people find out the truth. So one of the best things we can do is bad news about us is always better coming from us rather than somebody else. Because if somebody else discovers it, they're going to wonder what else was missing. So it's very important for us to get ahead of the bad news. I mean, look what's happening to Toyota right now. We don't know exactly what's all happening behind the scenes, but one thing is there's bad news that keeps coming out. And this drip of bad news is a lot worse than if you just come out with all the bad news. Here's a good example of that, of the opposite. David Letterman. David Letterman got himself in a jam, and as soon as he realized it, he just got on his show and just was up front. And notice how that has no longer been in the news. Yeah. Because he got out in front, he said it all, and then what else were they going to report? Well, like David Letterman says, it was already out. Yeah. So one of the most important things we can do is, no matter how tough the situation, be as honest quickly, because one thing is for sure, bad news doesn't get better over time. It gets worse.
Stephen, I just got the halfway point in our program. I told you this program moves, and you know because you've been on the show before. We always like to go back to the camera, ladies and gentlemen, and reintroduce our program for those of you who may have tuned in a little bit late. I'm John Monsul. My guest is Stephen Gaffney, our guest for tonight's program. The title of the show is Communicating Today. We've been on Channel 10 for 20 years, rapidly approaching our 600th program. The theme of this show, ladies and gentlemen, is all about something called honesty and truthfulness. And if I hold up this dollar bill, you'll see there's the first president of the United States, George Washington, on the middle of this bill. And there's an old story about George Washington way back when he was a youngster, knee-high to a grasshopper. He chopped down a cherry tree, and his father came to him one day and said, "George, who chopped down that cherry tree?" And he said, "Father, I have to admit, I chopped down the cherry tree." He was as honest and as truthful and as sincere as he could possibly be. That's why he's the father of our country, and that's why he was our first president, a wonderful, great president, as a matter of fact. And there was another guy named Honest Abe. Abe Lincoln, our 16th president, got the nickname of Honest Abe for the same reason. He was honest, he was truthful, he was sincere, and he became one of our most beloved presidents because of that. Our guest tonight, Stephen Gaffney. Again, welcome to our show, Stephen. Stephen has written a wonderful book in cooperation with a co-author, Colleen Francis, who helped him, and they worked together on this wonderful book, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I read from cover to cover. It's only 190 pages. It moves swiftly. It moves beautifully. It's an easy book to read. Has wonderful ideas in there, and best of all, when Stephen and Colleen tell you what you should do to be successful and honest and truthful in professional sales, they give you tons of examples of how you can do it. They don't just say, be honest, but here's how you do it. These are the exact, precise examples of how you accomplish that. And Stephen, I think that's a tremendous earmark in this particular book. Well, because you back your stories up with hard facts.
Well, because here's the thing. Everybody says about being honest, but why do people get in a jam? And that's because, it's easy to tout to be honest, but let's say we have a product and it actually has some downside. What do you do about that? Do you say it? Do you not? In the book, we cover that. And one of the most important things we've got to do is just be upfront about it. So it's easy to tout this honesty, but how do you do it? How do you answer objections in a very honest and sincere way? And how do you make your business grow? And the overall argument of the book is the most important, successful, long-term key for businesses, the biggest long-term key to success, I should say, is being honest. Look at the most successful companies that are continually successful over time. They are honest and upfront.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, I know as I read through the book, and I mentioned it was 190 pages or so, Stephen, and I read it in 3 or 4 days. It moves very rapidly. It's a beautiful book to read. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to look at this book if you're in sales, or even if you're not in sales, if you just want to think in terms of honesty, truthfulness, sincerity, which seems to be quite lacking in our society nowadays around the world. You can find a lot of great examples in this book right here. Honesty sells. Now, you mentioned a couple of principles in the book. For example, in this particular book, Stephen, about using compassion, about being empathetic. Empathetic, putting yourself in the other person's shoes to try to find out how they feel, what's going on in their life, what kind of problems they're having, and how you think you can help them to solve those problems. What's this business about empathy and compassion all about?
Well, a lot of people talk about empathy and compassion. The big point in the book that we stress is you got to ask questions. You want to probe. And do we think we know what our customer wants, or do we actually know what our customer wants? A while back, I was asked to give a speech, and the purpose of giving a speech was to the sales folks because they were spending, interesting enough, too much time planning and not enough time meeting with their customer and asking questions. And when it really came down to it, what it meant was customer intimacy. In other words, they weren't spending time asking and finding out things about their customer. They were spending it back in the office, wondering and contemplating and designing presentations that they thought the customer was interested in. Yeah. So one of the points of the book, and one of the things that people can do, sounds so obvious, but is to really ask questions and be successful. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Take a particular person that you have a problem with in your life, and ask yourself, on a scale from 1 to 10, how well do you think they listen to you? And most people will say, well, John, they don't really listen to me. And then I often ask people in the audience, if I had these other people in the other room, and I asked them, on a scale from 1 to 10, how well do you think they listen to you, what would they say? And most of the time, people reluctantly would say, well, you know what, they would feel that we don't listen to them. And here's the point. They will not listen to us until we first listen to them. So whether it's in sales, asking questions and listening, or just breaking up and trying to have a breakthrough in interpersonal issues, the key question is, and the key thing we need to do is really listen.
Absolutely. And there's another policy or another feature that you point out and emphasize strongly in the book, Stephen, and that is put the client first and yourself second. Most people nowadays think, what's in it for me, me, me? Everything is me, me, me. Not the most valuable 3-letter word in the English dictionary is you. What can I do for you? What is your problem? How can I help you? How can I solve your problem as a salesperson or any kind of professional person? A doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, an accountant. How can I help you? What is your problem? Are you having trouble with the IRS, your tax problem? Are you having trouble with your teeth, your body, your health, or headaches, or whatever the case might be? And I like to go back to, again, another president. I mentioned Washington, our first president, honesty, truthfulness. I mentioned Abe, Honest Abe Lincoln, our 16th president, one of our greatest presidents. I'll mention another great president, JFK, John F. Kennedy, when he gave his famous inauguration speech way back in 1961, and he said those famous last words, ask not what you can do for your country, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which again puts the country first and yourself second. Same thing in sales, put the customer and the client first, put yourself second.
Well, the key thing is to really think what's in it for, well, everybody, the universal language I'll speak in, what's in it for me. So we're going to be thinking is what's in it for our customer. And in fact, if people will send me an email and say that they had watched this show, I will send them for free an article I wrote on 7 drivers of human behavior. 7 drivers so they can take whatever problem they have and think and brainstorm what's in it for the other person and design all kinds of sales presentations, communication, breakthrough issues, all kinds of stuff by these 7 drivers. I'll send it to them for free. But the point overall that I want to make is that we need to be thinking what's in it for the other person. But one of the reasons why we don't know what's in it for the other person is because we don't stop and listen. You know, people complain about their kids, or they complain about their boss, or they complain about their coworkers, and they don't really think, what's in it for the other person to give me that information? What's in it for that person to be motivated? And these great leaders that we have will actually often be thinking what's in it for that other person, because that is the most important thing that we can figure out.
Absolutely. And, I had another guest on my program a few months ago, Stephen, a fellow by the name of Dan Burns. He came from Chicago to be on our show. And again, we were talking about his book, and the title of his book was The First 60 Seconds. And I guess that applies not only to sales, which is kind of like we're emphasizing tonight, but I think it applies to anything in life. When you first meet people, people can look at you and size you up in the first 60 seconds, which is what Dan Burns was talking about in his book, and they can say, well, how's this guy look? How's he dressed? How's his shoes shine? Is he nice? Is he neat? Is he clean? Is he mannerly? Is he polite? Does he look like a decent, honest, kind of straightforward kind of guy or gal? And they can size you up pretty quickly in that first minute. There's a lot to that.
And here's the thing. I don't know Dan's book, and I don't want to cut on his book, but what I do want to say is, often people make this whole thing about first impressions. I think it can be nerve-wracking. Have you ever met somebody who is just, you meet them and they make a great first impression, but after you get a chance to talk to them, they're just a jerk. When you walk away, you don't think, well, they made a great first impression. You think, what a jerk they are. What I coach people is don't get so hung up on first impressions. Of course it's important, but what's most important is a lasting impression. And what's most important about lasting impressions is to just be honest.
Right. I know that's absolutely true. And you mentioned also something that, well, in fact, there's an old saying about don't judge a book by its cover. And so again, there's that first impression thing again. Well, what is underneath the person? What is substantially that person? What are they really comprised of? What are they made up of, and so forth?
Yeah, and that's the whole thing is, who we are inside ultimately does come out. I think we think we're a lot better actors and actresses. Right. John, I had a lady in a course of mine one time. She said, I was told to come here to learn how to change my tone. Are you going to teach me how to change my tone? I said, well, what's going on? And she said, people say that I sound like I'm mad. And I said, well, are you mad? She goes, oh, yeah, I'm furious. Well, of course, she sounded mad because she was. So often people don't realize how they're coming across. They're like, got their happy face, but they're just grinning inside. And so the most important thing is to really be sincere, and people can tell the truth.
You're absolutely right, Stephen. Now, I know that in the book we talk about something from a sales standpoint again, since we're kind of emphasizing professional sales and honesty and truthfulness in sales, something called referrals. And a lot of people say, well, referrals, I hate to ask people to give me a referral. I feel like I'm imposing on them. I'm taking advantage of them. I'm asking them to do something they don't really want to do. They don't want to give me the names of their friends or their family or their colleagues and say I'm telling tale on them and so forth. But you say there's a certain way that you can do it. You can be honest about it. You can be truthful about it. And you can be diplomatic when you ask for referrals. But referrals, as you point out in the book, Stephen, are the life's blood of any business or most businesses. And I think you even quote a statistic that says something like, if you do referrals properly, that sometimes as much as 70 to 80% of renewal business can come from referrals, but only if you ask for them.
Well, you got to ask.
You're reluctant not to.
you got to ask for it, and the bottom line is you're not going to get any referrals unless you tell people the truth and you treat them in a very honest way. And, just in the spirit of honesty, if people want a great book on just referrals, there's a guy who wrote a book called Unlimited Referrals by Bill Cates, that's the author, and he did a great job on the subject. Overall, my point in this whole referral idea is you want to actually do a great job with people, build that trust, and then in a very honest way, you can ask them, look, in the spirit of honesty, I'm trying to grow my business. Would you be comfortable in referring me to somebody else along your level who might be interested in hiring me? In other words, just have a candid conversation. But people don't tend to have that candid conversation. They have these awkward conversations. And again, it comes back to one of the key points is just being upfront.
Stephen, I just got the 1-minute warning, which in the football games in the NFL, when the referee blows his whistle and he waves his red flag at the time the game is almost over, our show is almost over. I want to thank you very much for coming on our program again for the third or fourth or fifth time. I've lost count. You've been on our show so many times. And please come back and see us again sometime when you write your next book. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go back to the camera and thank our guest, Stephen Gaffney, president of Stephen Gaffney Company, for coming on our program tonight and telling you again about his wonderful book, Honesty Sells. Get the book. You can buy it anywhere on any of the bookstores, on the internet, and what have you. We always go out by saying, keep on communicating for success, and I'll give you his website, www.stephengaffney.com, or just be honest, which is the name of our program, .com for tonight. Thank you again. Come back and see us, and bye-bye. Take care.